forward to this computer. All right. Welcome to my computer screen.
Hello, everyone. I will just say a few words about myself.
Yeah, please.
I'm Daniel. I'm in Austria. Yeah, for those of you that don't know, it's this little country that many people think it belongs to Germany, but so it's a little mountain country. And I'm from Vienna. I'm studying Japanese studies, and I'm very interested in the Kyoto school, in Heidegger, in Nietzsche, in Dostoevsky, in Carl Jung. These are like my favorite thinkers.
Yeah. Well, that says a lot about you right there. How did you get involved in philosophy and reading Jung, and like how long have you been doing that?
Quite long, actually. I think the first philosophy book I picked up was, already at high school. Yeah. I had some phases in my life where I didn't read so much of philosophy, but I always came back to it. But just the danger that is kind of prescient in the world, and now more so than ever, I think, especially in the last few years, I think it has become really strong. The whole, what we call the meaning crisis in kind of the Vivekian sense. But these things stretch back much longer into our history, right?
Yeah.
And for me, it's more like I'm doing this out of necessity, trying to understand everything, trying to understand the nihilism of our time, and also trying to find ground. And I'm doing it also, like, I had some personal struggles, like most people who read philosophy.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, there's nothing like crisis.
Yeah. I mean, now we have a sense of crisis, and the word crisis is all over the place, right?
Yeah, and it's not obvious what it is, right?
Exactly.
We don't. Most of the time when the people talk about what the crisis is, they're probably not talking about what the crisis is, right? It's that strange of a time. It seems.
Yeah, we don't know what happens. We don't know what just happens. When this ground breaks away beneath us, and we don't know why, because most people of us don't have like this kind of like deep knowledge of history like people in the 19th century sometimes had.
Yeah.
They could read Greek, they could read Latin.
Right.
And now more and more people don't have access to this world of the past anymore.
Right. Even though it's strangely available, right? You can get a YouTube video on any any part of the history, but there's some way, I think what you mean, my sense is like in the 19th century, this sense of history was a different sense than we have now.
Yeah, it seems that it started then out there because even Nietzsche criticizes that this kind of like false sense of history, or for the first time sense of history. I mean, Johannes described this, right?
Yeah.
And that we have all become antiquarians and these kind of like historians, book readers, reactive talents.
Yeah.
And for Nietzsche, this was in the unpublished notes that there's something great is awakening with this historical sense.
Right.
And that we're kind of like departing from our history in a sense. And moving into this era of progress where we try to get away from it and declaring everything that has been, rendering it meaningless.
Yeah.
that which has been is now, it's not it's not worth anything.
Right. Yeah, totally. What had you get into Japanese studies?
I was reading a lot of novels from Japanese authors, and I was also kind of like very interested in the architecture. And I've known some Heidegger then, and I knew that Heidegger was very. I mean, he's like a master for the Japanese philosophers. He's so much revered there, and this kind of like, and there's always this fascination for these traditional art forms in Japan. And I think we can learn a lot from the East. I mean, that's what Nishitani is outlining in the book, how we can move through our own nihilism,
right,
with the help of Buddhism.
Yeah. And just so people who are not familiar with who Nishitani is, he's part of the Kyoto school, right? Which is basically when basically it's a school of Japanese philosophers who really were oriented with the German philosophers, right? The continental philosophers. And they've you really see in my experience of reading them so far, which hasn't been that long, you really get the profound, they do it profoundly, right? In a very, very deep way. And especially this thing about the sense of nothing, or the sense of sunyata, or emptiness. And I think the thing I've been appreciating is just how we kind of miss that one in the West. It's kind of like we just kind of missed it somehow. And like, because we've missed it in some sense, I think this is what I'm appreciating about Nishitani in the book Religion is in Nothingness, is the missing of which has nothing become a kind of absence, right? A nullity, or like a nihilism, right? And in the East, they really have this sense of the kind of the existential kind of womb that everything's in some sense, right? Is the essence of their perceptions and how they see, and so they have this very inclusive, strong sense of emptiness. And the consequence of not seeing anything, right, like, has been huge. And my sense with Heidegger is it seems like, especially in Heidegger's work around the pre-Socratics, there's a sense in which it seems like, I think from Heidegger's perspective, it seems like he thought it could have gone more in the nothing way, right? There's like, there was the possibility of that with Heraclitus and all the different pre-Socratics, so he's, in some sense, his going back into history in the sense of a new beginning. I really kind of get this sense that he, in a certain way, in the atmosphere of the original philosophical thought, right, is that in some sense he's trying to think that through, right, begin it again, right. And you can really see a very, very deep kinship. I'm imagining, he doesn't talk about it that explicitly, but I'm imagining a really deep kinship with Taoism and Buddhism, right, in some way.
He doesn't talk much about emptiness as a concept, right? He talks about, for example, in the Thing essay, he talks about how the jug and what is constitutive of the jug is the emptiness.
Yeah.
He says Leere in German.
Yeah.
And for example, Shunyata is translated with the same word in German, is Leere. It's kind of like this this emptiness as fullness in that sense. So when you have like a glass, that this is not nothing,
Yeah.
in a sense, but there's this fullness of this
Yeah.
emptiness.
Right. Right.
And I know I've read from the later Heidegger, where he talks about Parmenides, and he really, I think he really wants to trace back this oneness to Parmenides.
Right. Right. And that, you know, one of the things that one of the things in the back of my mind is our four-way dialogoses that I've been doing with Chris and John and Jordan. The next one we're going to be doing is going to be on looking at essentially what in dialogos, right, in philosophical dialogue, right, what is it to basically look at the ground of it being emptiness, right? In contrast to something where I think most conversations ground is more in like narrative, right? And so one of the things we want to explore, right, is this sense in which what is that difference between, something coming from narrative, right, which John, with his work on religion and all that kind of stuff, I've been hearing him talk a lot about that, right, which is he kind of thinks that narrative is not as primary, right, as many people assume that it is, right, and that there's another way to get at it, right, that's not that isn't based in narrative, that's based in something much more primordial, right? So we're opening up this exploration in the sense of like, well, what is it to have a dialectic that goes into dialogos from emptiness, right? Revealing that emptiness, displaying that emptiness, right? Having it arise out of emptiness, versus like narrative and going back and forth with it. Yeah.
The thing, I think, what Nishitani would say to this is because history for us in the West has always been this divine drama, right? Starting from the fall of mankind and stretching back to the eschaton, to the end of the world, the apocalypse. And for Nishitani, this would then be like the historicity of things. And maybe it's Nishitani. I mean, Nishitani knew German very well. I think he even received the Goethe medal, so like one of the highest prizes of for scholarship in Germany, what you can receive. Geschichtlichkeit in German, that's historicity, means something like there's something sent to you. So historicity has always been sent from a trans-historical plane, which is like the divine. The historicity starts from this trans-historical plane, which we have always located outside, right? The history of Platonism and Christianity is always like a world beyond. Nishitani would call it like the yonder, I think the shore, the yonder shore, like from this shore, like beyond, right? Okay. And now what he sees then is in Nietzsche really struggled to overcome this, but he couldn't find a place or a standpoint where he could recharge the historicity of history. For him, things like the Dionysian were like pointing back to mythos, and then you're in narrative again. So for him to be fully in time, to realize historicity radically in time, that would require the standpoint of emptiness. And then you can give then you can give like a whole new meaning to what happens. Because now when I've thought of this, because we were talking about progress, right, in the last lecture with Johannes, and now it's this kind of sense we are in this linear kind of like phase of history where the historicity has become radically immanent. And Nishitani would say the same thing. Historicity is immanent. It really immanent. So that means we have like this line, and everything that happens is like sucked into this progress thinking.
Right.
And everything that happens, then we try to think in that kind of like framework.
Yeah, and even when we try to think outside of that framework, we end up doing it in such a way that's in that framework. There's so much gravity to it. Yeah. Yeah.
So, and the standpoint of emptiness then would mean that we shackle ourselves from that, and then we can realize time and history again,
right,
in their historicity, which is this very primordial historicity.
Yeah. Well, but we probably won't make as much money though. There's something about like when you said that, like I really appreciated the thing that you said about that this there's a sense in which this sense of progress, this linear sense of history, we project it out in the future, we project it out of the past, we orient it based on it. It's got this kind of forward momentum that seems to be like faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. And you're right. I'm in Silicon Valley, right? I'm in, the Bay Area, and this is the highest concentration of like straight line historicity, right? You can kind of feel it, like, this everything is about that, streamlining it, right? And of course, I think this really gets into Heidegger's sense of Gestell and the age of technology. All of that seems to be really dancing together with this. But the thing you said about like that first thing you said, what was it? When you said the thing about trans history starts always beyond the shore, right?
Yeah.
And that's not this. That's not the straight line. That sense of history, right?
There's still elements of it because we still believe in salvation by technology, but most people do.
Right.
And I once said this in another conversation. I think I said, like, before we had like the overlords of like the church, for example, and now we want to get into the machine of the overlords of Silicon Valley, where they upload us to like the cloud, and there we can, like, I don't know, live in eternal hell.
Yeah, totally. So the thing he's saying about, so from your vantage point, how does one allow or realize this sense of emptiness, that the realization of such, as you said, like breaks the shackles, right, out of this off this sense? What's the telos of that? Like how, like what do you get as the sensibility that, how does that happen?
I would say the following. When we maybe do it like this. Nishitani maybe would construct the argument something like this. So we have immanent history in this on this line, right? That means we have kind of like what Heidegger would call the will to will.
Right.
We will every activity for its sake. So Nishitani says in the book Religion and Nothingness, he says, what happened after the death of God is that all facets of human life have sort of like, it seems as they are permeated by this will to will, what he calls an autotelic will. So they are goals in themselves. They have no higher goal beyond themselves.
Yeah.
So you have you have sex for the sake of having sex.
Right.
You have pleasure for the sake of having pleasure.
Right.
You build houses for the sake of building houses.
Yeah.
Which then like expands to this kind of like bubble, right? Which some countries had. I think in the US you also had this kind of like housing bubble.
Yeah.
And he says
track homes.
He says what is disclosed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go
what
ahead.
is this? What is disclosed, however, is this. I mean, he says this is this heat of modernity. This what Johannes would call it the explosion of modernity, right?
Yeah.
And what for Nishitani, what is disclosed is kind of like this infinite drive beyond everything humans do.
Yeah.
And the Buddhists, and I would also say the Christians, have identified that with karma or sin. And karma is this notion of, it seems that you always have to do something. You always have this burden on your shoulders that you have to do something.
Right.
But because we can realize that we still have like we have freedom ahead of us, in a sense, we kind of like we can make ethical conclusions. And that's coming to the Senkoan of kill the Buddha on the road when you see him.
Yeah.
That means when you see an idol, for example, when you see, let's say you see, I don't know, an ex-girlfriend you really liked, but she doesn't want to know anything. But you still keep, you with your infinite drive, you still keep texting her, right?
Right.
And then, but that causes suffering, right? To you and your ex-girlfriend. But then you realize it, and you're letting go in this Gelassenheit sense. You active letting go of that idol, and then you come closer to yourself.
Right. And that closer to yourself, right? That sense of coming close to yourself, in some sense, is getting closer to, in some sense, getting closer. It's like a little hit of nothing, like some kind of releasement. Like it realizes a sense of a space or something that opens up, right? Like, at least that's for me. Whenever I like notice I'm in some neurotic loop or something like that, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, like I'm crazy. There's like a little moment of like where I see what I was seeing with, right? I see my own drivenness, and there's like a little like a disidentification of some kind, and some kind of a stasis or a spaciousness that opens up. And I'm wondering if that's what, Nishitani's kind of getting at, right? About like, is that like a little taste of maybe something like emptiness or something like the nothing?
I mean,
remember, I'm an American trying to talk about nothing. You gotta go slow with me.
There's a funny story, by the way, about this, about the nothing. Kind of like an excursus. When Heidegger gave a talk about the nothing, so being and nothing, in the late 20s, he said at a talk in the 70s, very late talk of his, he said that there was a Japanese student there who immediately understood what he wanted to say,
Right.
and he translated this lecture into Japanese.
Yeah.
And the Japanese immediately understood that this nihil, this nothing, shall not be understood in a nihilistic way.
Yeah.
But all the Europeans did.
Yeah. Totally. Well, it's kind of that there's so many ways that just makes sense, right? It does seem to me one of the things that I think I mean, all around me, you just go to a suburb, right? And these kind of track homes and these shopping malls, right? And the senior citizen parks, and like there's something, they're almost like the nihilism like bleeds out of them, right? But they're all these kind of spectacles in some way, right? That they're obviously pretending to be something, right? Like the houses are built to look like houses. Such a strange thing, when you think about it. But America's got a lot of that going on, like big time. And right underneath the surface, if you really like it, at least in my experience, is like when you really feel into it, right? The parking lots and like, the shallow conversations, and also just the fact that nobody's walking around going like, this is absolute hell, right? You can, at least for me, I can like sense this kind of hollow queasiness, right? That like goes right down. It's like a dropping sensation in my solar plexus. It's like like kind of nauseating, but it's got that nullity, right? That sense of absence of meaning, essentially, right?
It's these hollow aisles, right? When you walk through a large city today, and you're like, you have this explosion of sounds, images, and smells, and people, right, and traffic, and everything, and it's just this kind of like, but they are all hollow, right? In a way, these images are all hollow when you come with your Nietzschean hammer and hammer on your idols. They break immediately.
Yeah.
There's no substance behind all these things, and then that's nihilism. When you lose your substance. I mean, that's a collapse. I mean, for Nishitani, he has these 3 levels or 3 stages. We have substance thinking, and when then that collapses, you have nihilism.
Yeah. And then underneath that is sunyata.
Exactly.
Because that's what he was saying about Nietzsche, right? He said he's like, Nietzsche didn't go far enough into the nihilism. It's like, he stopped too short. He's like, no, you should go into it further.
I mean, he said something like he came closest to the standpoint of Buddhism than all thinkers before him, but he couldn't come to this final place.
And
that's the tragedy. That's the tragedy of Nietzsche.
Right. In this final place. What is, like, if one comes to this final place, this sunyata, and then I go and I walk, I take a walk and I walk in like the houses of hell and the suburbs and the temples of nihilism. And I've said yes to the great doubt, right? I've realized this sense of I've gone all the way through, and I'm in sunyata. And then I walk through the suburb, and then I go to Disneyland, and I do these things. What is the difference?
I think it's hard to say. I mean, even when we talk, okay, I'm not enlightened, so I can't say anything about that. But it seems to me that you will still feel the heat. Enlightenment is not something. It's often not something that is like constant. I mean, often you only have glimpses of enlightenment, and that's often what in Buddhism actually these are these glimpses that lead you to the journey and keep you there. And it's often what you said before, when you, for example, when you're really neurotic. And I think many Buddhists also had this sense of great doubt, right? They really went through a period of suffering, of anxiety, of nihilism. And then at one point you start doubting that. Is that really me who is having all these thoughts? Who is that who is having these thoughts? And if you can release that, if you don't get attached to it, if you can find momentary releasement of it, you can maybe find some greater, more aspirational forces.
Right.
And that's then what in this religious sense, this higher self, right? Second self, the self with capital S in the Jungian terms.
Right.
But because you asked me, I can show you. So that's John Mewiki also recommended it. It's this Kyoto School intro book. So do you have it?
Yeah, I have it on PDF.
So when we have there these 10 ox herding pictures, right? That you may be familiar with. Here. So and we could say this is like a quest to the higher self in a way. So what it says is you see
looks a little like you.
The guy? No.
What do you mean you're not in line? That looks just like you.
So in some sense, at first you're wondering. You have kind of like a sense of awe in the world. But still you feel if something is missing. And then you see the ox, and you just see the back of the ox first. So you see like glimpses of the higher self. And then you're fighting with the ox, because like the higher self, it's like when Nietzsche described what Zarathustra, when he had the heaviest thought in the Swiss Alps, right? He has this sense of he has to go down. He has this Untergang, Aufgabe. He has to throw away his present ego and move in this direction of Zarathustra, his higher self, in that sense. And that's a fight. That's always like a fight. And then you discipline it, and that's a hard practice in a sense. That's like the hard meditation retreats for days and days, and pain and all of that which arises.
I've done those.
And then and then number 6 would then be playing with the ox, right? You've mastered it. You're now master of yourself, and you can. That's like, I would say that's like also like the childlike elements of you can come back, can shine forth again from your being.
Right.
And then the last 2 are these. So it's this and this. And I've read that it's not a succession of those, but a constant repetition of those 2. Emptiness and the worlding of the world, just pure beauty of the world. And you can see that then again. You don't have to like, when you see like a tree or so, you don't want to distort the being of the tree, or you don't. It's also not that you just go on your street where you live and you just don't recognize it.
Right.
Because that's most people do, right? When you're in nihilism, you're just obsessed with yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you don't give any value to any outside things. The birds, the trees,
right.
the sparkling of the water, something like this.
It's kind of like you're in like that in nihilism. It's kind of like you're always haunted by your own sense of substantiality, right? And it's such a claim, and it has needs, and you have to take it for walks, and you gotta like make sure it's liked, and like, but there is this kind of sense, right, where it's I think it's hard to comprehend to what degree, how deeply unsubstantial the self is, right? However, it's the very unsubstantiality of it allows for, right, the mistake of itself as substance, right? It's like it's a, yeah. I mean, if you just well, have you ever done any of the meditation retreats? Have you gone for long sits before?
Very short, like 2 days, 3 days, something.
Well, maybe.
I have a koan on that.
Oh, yeah.
No, Nishitani always had a koan for very, I would say, believers of like Christian faith. So often the translator of Religion and Nothingness, he wrote once a piece where he said there was one koan Nishitani was particularly fond of, and that was the following. So he said, and these are really paradoxical questions, right? So he says, when Paul says in the letter to the Galaters, I think, I'm taking that very seriously as a Zen Buddhist, says Nishitani. I think I can understand it. And then he says, so Paul says, I live, but not me, Christ lives in me. Not Paul lives, not he himself lives. And then Nishitani asks, who is speaking there?
Okay, read it again. Read it again. Read the thing again. I just want to make sure.
No, I have not the German version of this book. So I was.
Oh, you have to translate, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's not. But these kind of like ad hoc translations of me are so bad.
Yeah.
Okay. Wait. Where is it? Okay, Paul says, I live, but not me lives, Christ lives in me. So not Paul lives, not he himself lives. And Nishitani is asking, who's speaking there?
Yeah.
When Christ lives in me,
yeah,
is that, so that would be like the obvious question. Is Paul speaking, or is Christ speaking?
Right.
And for deep believers, this can really haunt you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's a like, when you're in deep nihilism and you say, oh, the world is all bad, and so who's speaking there?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And often then a few moments later, you're like, just you can have moments of awe and wonder again.
Right.
And you're just like, you feel like as you're normal. But what you see is that there's these kind of like, what he wants to get you, there's this kind of like non-substantiality to you.
Mhm.
And you often don't even know who's speaking in you. That's often this kind of like when we talk in the Jungian way, the shadow realization, when you have this like, sometimes when you feel, when you're really in a bad place, you have all these very disturbing thoughts and maybe resentful thoughts. And then you say, but who's speaking there?
Yeah.
That's what you might ask yourself.
Yeah, totally. So who's speaking there?
I mean, I could only intellectually, that's usually not what you do with a koan, try to intellectually explain it.
Right. Yeah.
But even here, that the German this German scholar who wrote this said, or wrote, that es sollte uns erst einmal die Sprache verschlagen, which means that our language drops out of kind of like we are stunned by this question.
Mhm.
And then he says, maybe in these blinks of an eye without words, the authentic dialogue and its long shared way to understanding or realization begins.
Right.
I know this with like people in the West always want to understand everything.
Yeah.
And Nishitani and the Senkoans really try to like get you out of this framework.
Yeah.
It's not about understanding. That's why they are so paradoxical.
Mhm.
You can't understand them with your logic,
Yeah.
but it's about getting to a deeper place, and then about participating in the world, realizing your self nature, your Buddha nature, and thus having a deeper participation within the world.
Right.
I would say.
Right. It's like a part of, I mean, whenever I've had like kind of shifts, like of insight of some kind, right? Like big or small, like there is always this experience of, it is the same thing, right? Reveals itself differently, right? In that way, something speaks that on some level, right, in the shift, I see it, right? And then I recall that I've on some level always seen it, but haven't seen it, right? But now it's obvious, right? This kind of sense of kind of this disclosure. And I think I mean, essentially that's why I think, I mean, a personal level, why like I grapple with the text that I do and everything is because on some level it's like it's all about that, right? About on some level, because it seems to me that philosophy, or you could say like you could say if there's such a thing as like a measure, right, of getting it, right, or seeing it is I've always noticed my perceptions change, right? Like it's a perceptual thing. I like the world shows up and something shines forward more, right? And there's that sense, right? And I think it's one of the things we were talking about earlier, like my experience of reading Heidegger and being in time. It's really that sense of, on some level, I think Heidegger is a little bit Koan-y, right?
Sure. Totally.
But that quality of like having you step so far outside of your frame of reference to then look and see if you can look where he's asking you to look, right? And just that gesture, right, I would imagine is something similar in a koan, right? Is koans seem to be like that. Like I always got this sense koans were designed to frustrate the shit out of you, right? Like Give you a koan and go sit underneath the rock and like 8 years, like you're in knots, you know, and the master comes up and he's like, you ready yet? And gives the answer and it's like, nope, 10 more years. But there's a kind of a moment of like that struggle. There's a transcendence in that struggle, right? Yeah.
But that's when you read Heidegger, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, first of all, it's just, what does he want from me?
Yeah.
What does this all mean?
Yeah.
And then you struggle with the text, and sooner or later, what you just said, your perception of the world will change, will alter.
Yeah. Yeah.
For the place where you can see how being reveals itself to you in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And when I watched some of your videos, I kind of like, I had when you were walking around the street, right? And I've had the sense that you were really then they're getting at what Heidegger wanted you to notice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, but he won't give me a straight answer if I got it or not. Yeah, that quality of being, you know, of the world. Like that's the thing. I just, you know, I was going to ask you about this too. And I think we talked about this in Johannes's class a bit, but then the time was up. This connection between aletheia, right? The event, like the event of, well, Evo de Janeiro's like translation, disabscondedness, right? Or unconcealment. And what, and this is really where I've really learned this is in circling. What we do is in circling, right? Which is just, it's a kind of a relational, it's like being in relationship and being with what is. And if it's interesting to think about, like, well, if a practice, being with that which is, right, is a practice, right? The only way it could be an aspiration is if in some way is concealed, right? Because the more is the only way. And I have a feeling on some level, I was like, I think circling ended up accidentally being addressing nihilism in that way, right? Because it kind of calls forth a different stand, right, to anything, right? And especially with each other. It's very difficult to do with people on an interpersonal level, like just be with what is. Like there's so many different pulls of social norms and everything. So to really have people practice like not fixing anybody, right? Not helping anybody, but just being in the presence of, and that there is something here, and that it's most likely its deeper truth is hidden. However, there's a sense in which if we can hear that which I sense is concealed, which is an interesting thing, is like what the hell are you perceiving actually when you sense something's hidden, right? In what way is it present? And I think that I want to tease that out a little bit if we can, like in your opinion about like this sense of concealment, right? And that sense of emptiness and nothing, right? Because it is really difficult to really think about nothing, because I keep wanting to, and as I'm reading Nishitani, I think I'm starting to grok it out of like the corner of my eye for a second or two before it slips away. but I keep wanting to go think about nothing, and I get this picture of like a thing that's not nothing, right? And I don't get the sense that that's what he's talking about. It's like there's an absolute nothing, right? It even negates itself, right? It is its own negation, right? It's like it allows for, but it's very difficult. You can't, it's like any kind of representation. You can't directly, it seems to me, you can't directly represent it. It can't be represented. it'll just negate all of your representations or something. But this connection between feeling into what's hidden and then also being present to the emptiness, it seems like those things are very, very connected.
Mm.
Do you agree?
Mm. Because it's inexhaustible.
Yeah.
These mysteries that you can uncover, unveil, they are inexhaustible.
Yeah.
For Nishitani, this was always our attempt to make everything representational, fixed,
Yeah.
exhaustible,
Yeah.
consummate.
Yeah.
That brought them to collapse. While if we can allow for this possibility of things unfolding themselves into an inexhaustible moreness, if we allow if we genuinely allow things to be like that, in this kind of like we are releasing them, we are liberating them from our, from this kind of like, I mean, Heidegger talks about this, fix it, positing, this kind of like, Gegenstell, it comes from also vorstellen, which is putting forth.
Mm.
When you put it forth, you posit it.
Yeah.
And then it can't change anymore. It's fixed in that sense.
Yeah.
And we try to make this with everything, right? That's why it's Gegenstell, it's the gathering of positing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when we do that, we make a thing and make it an object, something radically graspable in that sense for us, for our intellect.
Mm-hmm.
But we do not rob things to have their own mode of presencing, to have their inexhaustible moreness behind them.
Yeah.
In emptiness is pure aletheia. It's a thing.
Yeah.
It's laid bare.
Okay. Yeah.
You see it in its pureness.
Right.
You can see a tree, and Nishitani uses, I mean, he has three. He has these three levels. I think you know this, field of consciousness.
Yeah.
He says it in Japanese, jittai, substance thinking. You conceive of things as substance.
Yeah.
Then you have field of nihilism, caused as shutai. You see things just from your own perspective, in a sense, from your subjective sense. And then you have field of shunyata, which he then will call things are jitai, which is things in themselves as themselves. You can see a tree as it is as a tree. In its pure being, so to say.
Yeah.
And you've so to say, you've thrown all your shells off, so to say.
Yeah.
And for Nishitani, it's also maybe worth clarifying. For him, it was always nihilism is a place we have arrived at through our thinking, so to say. And it's we have to go back to what he called the near side. So the truth is on a nearer side than you are self near to you, so to say. That's what he says in the book. It's this absolute near side where we have to step back towards.
Yeah.
And then that's why he uses in the book this kind of like dropped off body mind, this Zen metaphor from Dogen.
Yeah.
So you throw off your representations, your conceptualizations, your frames, you throw all of that off, and you see just pure being.
Yeah.
And that's I would say that's pure aletheia as well. So he sometimes draws a connection with aletheia.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting, you know, there's like a, and you can notice there is a sense in which, like with sound, right? There is a way in which you can actually really hear the silence in it, right? It's a little bit more difficult with seeing, but there is a way where even seeing, there's some way in which, what is that? Nishitani goes through that whole dialectic about the eye, where he talks about, was it the eye? It's the eye um, sees, but it's also precisely in it not seeing itself, right? Like there's that sense where it negates itself. And so it's like, it's not, it's emptiness, right? It's not seeing is present, saturates all the seeing, right? And there is this kind of sense where if you just look at the most simplest perception, there is a sense where you can kind of feel almost like it's like you can in some way see the mirror, right? When you're looking in the mirror, right? Like if you look for the mirror, like the instinct is to look for, as if like as if the mirror can reflect itself, but the mirror is the thing that's actually it's so revealed, it's concealed, it conceals itself, and it's revealing of everything else. So there's this kind of quality of this, like, because I think about this one a lot of like, well, what is it to see the mirror? Because on one level, the mirror, when you look in the mirror, it's the only thing going on. It's the mirror, but the mirror is the one thing that can't be reflected, right? So to be present to the only thing that's going on some sense, right, requires a kind of, I don't know, it requires a letting happen, right, in that degree.
You have to kind of like need Gelassenheit, releasement, to let, to come back to your silence example, to let the silence speak forth its being, so to say.
Yeah.
By the way, that's interesting. Maybe you know this. I think John Cage, that there's this music piece, 4 minutes 33 seconds, where the pianist is just like sitting in front of the piano and then doing nothing.
Oh yeah, yeah, totally.
It's just silence.
Yes.
And I think he was inspired by Eckhart a little bit in coming up with that piece of music. And you just have to think about how difficult it is for people to bear these 4 minutes 33 seconds, and how difficult it is to kind of like have to like speak in Nishitani language, listening of non-listening. So that we can allow for this. We can allow for this. We don't try to listen actively and try to like fixate something, make a representation again, and we also do not. Most people might have eerie thoughts while this, because we that's what most people say when they do meditation for the first time. It's like you can't bear the soundlessness and just doing nothing, just releasing everything. You cannot bear it.
Yeah.
But just letting the silence be the silence. That's so difficult, right?
Right.
But there is something there. That's the weird thing.
Yeah.
It's not nothing. It's in that sense. It's empty. There's an empty yet full quality to it. If you really allow it to be there.
It's funny as we're talking about it, I'm like, I feel like we're talking ourselves into it. like you said, this moment where I felt like my whole all my molecules, like they just got a little bit farther apart for a second. Like a little, just the sense of space. Yeah, because isn't there, it seems to me that there's like that sense of silence, right, which in some ways is the clearing of sound, right? In some sense it's like silence. Well, isn't it, I mean, isn't it like technically true, like a composer, what they're actually composing is the silent note. Like that's the thing that they're conditioning, right? It's not the sound that they're actually, they are making sound, but at another level, what the music, it's so hard to talk about music. But like, I think it was Yo-Yo Ma who talked about this. It's like, on some level, all he's doing is conditioning a silence. Like that's all, like the whole song is about conditioning the silence, right? And so how I hear that is like that the music is this way of articulating that silence in some way.
And I think that's why music is so meaningful to us as well. If you think about like, okay, there's a concert, and there's this tension all the time. You play with the tension, right? And behind that is this silence, which kind of, it's this supportive background that's always kind of maintaining all of that, bringing it into being. That's why I think Nishida talks about the nothing as something like the midwife of being. Something like it brings everything. Everything is with emptiness. Everything can only be with emptiness. And we have to have an entrusting relationship with that. But if we once have kind of like, we know that it's there, and the silence. I mean, I think Beethoven lost his ability to hear, right? So he was composing deaf. Many of his later works, at least.
Right.
So
yeah,
and so there's this fullness of silence, and you can
trusting.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
Even when it ends, and then there's just this pure releasement, and then out of this silence again is like the people applauding, cheering. But everything is only with the silence. That's I think the important thing for me. Everything can only be out of the silence. Every sound can only be out of the silence. Otherwise, it would just be meaningless. If you just have sounds all the time, it would be hell, right?
Yeah.
There's this consolation to silence in a way.
Trusting it. That's just I heard that's still lingering.
What? Yeah, that's what we have unlearned in a way. Just trusting
Mhm.
trusting the world in a sense. I mean, that's this critique of, because we always try to plan and model and control everything by our subjective will, but we can't trust the world anymore.
That's so interesting that you say that. Yeah. I want to hang with that for a moment. Trusting the world. And and how I'm hearing that, no pun intended, but how I'm hearing that is like trusting the silence of the world, right? Perhaps that's like, well, as I kind of stepped in that for a second, it's like if I trust the silence, listen for the silence, and then trust it. There is a sense in which that which the world can reveal. It seems like there's like almost in that trusting relationship with silence, I trust, and then it speaks. The world can speak, right? That which I would trust speaks trustworthy. And I just appreciate it. It was really beautiful. And also this sense of one of the things I've, we always talk about how fucked up the world is, right? Like, or especially right now. It's like just have you just have a field day. But but one of the things I've noticed is that there's actually a certain kind of ecstaticness, right? In actually seeing more of what's going on, and it's like the content can be atrocious, but there is a sense in which that whatever the truthness of it, right? There is an ecstaticness to that truth for me, right? That somehow allows, actually, like now that you say it, yeah, there is a trusting quality, right, to the world. I never thought about trusting the world. It's interesting. But I think you're onto something there.
But that's when you have, I think, when I think of it now, it's just when you want to enter into deep participation with someone, let's say, trust is like that whole thing that sustains you in a sense. Without trust, you can't. Trust is also for societies where you have people that can trust each other interpersonally. These are societies that will flourish.
Yeah.
But you can't measure trust, right?
No. Yeah, there is.
It ecstatically arises when things are as they ought to be.
Mm-hmm. Mm. And when things are as they ought to be, I'm just feeling that the kind of the dialectic, right, between when things are as they ought to be, I trust. But then there's this way in which I trust and the world discloses as it ought to be, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Like that the world can disclose in a trustful clearing, if you will, right? And that could even be the case even at the shopping mall with the nihilism oozing out, right? Like and I think this is what Heidegger in his work in the 30s especially, right? In the contributions, they're really like almost it's almost written in code of some kind, right? They're very difficult to break into, but all that stuff where he talks about the abandonment of being, right? Being's withdrawal, right? And that to be with, I think this is what, at least what he was saying in the 30s, my understanding, is that to be with to be with nihilism was essentially about to be with being as withdrawn, right? The being of beings, but precisely is to tolerate, the experience of its total concealment, right? Without flinching. I think that's basically the challenge. That was the challenge. Like, turn towards it. Realize your utter out of controlness of the loss of it. But that is being. It being as forgotten, right? And sticking with that and hanging with that. And I'm getting this kind of trusting relationship to this, because that's one of the things I noticed when I was talking about this when I down in Florida, these retirement communities that are just they're strikingly they're kind of simulations, right? And you think about it's like where you go to die. It's like it's just really it's really something. But I did notice a sense of being really interested in it and just seeing it and like seeing, like doing my best just to look right at it, right, in a kind of openness. And it's interesting. I think now that I think about this, I appreciate this. There was a sense in which that was me on some level trusting the world. And there was something releaseful, ecstatic about being in hell, right? That's, I think, what I'm getting from what you're saying.
So how do you feel about these simulations that we I mean, Heidegger would call this something like regions of, I don't know, representationality or so, that we are constantly into in our modern age. So he saw this coming with the TV. Yeah. So you are always drawn out into realms of imagining where, or representationing, where that are not real. Yeah. Simulations. Yeah. And I mean, for him, this was a great danger. Yeah. Because he saw this then coming back at us. Technology confusing our being, yeah, distorting our being. Yeah. And that's often what I feel, and also when I just heard you talking, you live in this kind of like, we create these simulations for ourselves to console ourselves in a weird way. Yeah. And then with the elderly, it's not, we don't trust this process of becoming old. Yeah. We don't trust them anymore. I mean, okay, they are old. What do they have to tell us? That's how many people think today. And then we just come with our subjective planning, and okay, we plan now, we build a resort or so for them. There they can live and do whatever they want to do. Watch TV all the time, or play golf or so. Yep. This is this instrumentalization of human beings in a sense. Yeah. That's also what I see with young parents. What they often do, they're like, your kid is your project. Your kid becomes your project, and you put your own subjective desires onto your kid. Totally. And don't let the kids be whatever that is like the own nature of the kid.
Right. Heaven forbid
And-
that they're talented. Then you just optimize the shit out of that. You go take them to classes, make sure they're, you know, this anxiety around this preciousness, right? So it's just a very strange time. I mean, I think what I think about it, is that what you asked me? Like,
yeah, what, yeah. Mm.
Well, at some level, it's all I think about. All the time, right? Really. It's not, actually, that's not far from the truth. It's interesting. One of the things that because there's so much urgency that it seems to elicit, right?
Mm.
It seems that urgency, I notice, has a lot of people get into a very kind of problem solving kind of consciousness around it, right?
Mm.
And I really don't have that sense that that the world is a problem, right? That can be solved. I really just that in fact I think sometimes that that kind of manic, like it just seems almost, it seems to exemplify the very thing, right, on some level. So I feel, actually it's interesting, this is I think a little bit what you're pointing out, like this trusting the world. I feel a lot of trust that there is intelligibility, like this isn't some way, this is the understanding of being forgetting itself, right?
Mm.
And you can start to feel the outlines of it, and it's intelligible, right?
Mm.
But I don't think I personally don't, it's not like I feel hopeful. In fact, I don't think it's something to be hopeful about or not. I think it's like I think it is dangerous. And I do think that, I think everybody, if you really ask them, we're heading towards a cliff. And there is this sense in which we're just going to go over the cliff. Like technology, we're going to make the faster phone. We're going to, whatever it is, there is a sense in which it's not just man. Yeah.
Mm. I like the understanding of being forgetting itself.
Yeah.
But that's really what's happening. That's really what's happening in a sense. This what Heidegger said: technology coming into our being, into our essence, confusing us,
Yeah.
distracting us,
Yeah.
and then we are in this constant mode of forgetting,
Yeah.
losing memory
Yeah.
of being.
Yeah.
And that's so, I think for Johannes, this is also like we have this, I think John Vervaeke calls it sati, right? And Johannes would say mnemosine in Greek. So it's this remembering
Yep.
your being.
Yep. Yep.
And that's so important. And that's what we can't do if we are stuck on our field of consciousness mode,
Yeah.
because we always try to create something out of us
Yeah.
in a purely subjective fashion.
Yeah. Yeah.
And remembering this is kind of like, comes back to this kind of like this higher self, kind of like the ox metaphor, what we had before with the Zen. The Zen Buddhist always has this ox, this higher self that he he realizes at one point, and then his journey begins. This journey of aspiration, of like, I'm aspiring to become a better person. I'm aspiring towards myself, I'm orienting myself towards the good.
Yeah.
And I trust, in a sense, I trust this whole thing, that it is good. I trust, this is like a decision you have to make. I trust that being is good.
Yeah.
And that what I'm doing is will bring about the good. And I think what's so awful in our age of nihilism is because we can't see the ground. It's like everything collapses into nothing.
Yeah.
Or it's rendered meaningless.
Yeah.
It's devoid of everything. So it's like, I think Axel said this in the group discussion yesterday. He said something like, we can make winter and summer through our technology, possibly, but then they aren't winter and summer anymore.
Mm-hmm.
They have lost their meaning as winter and summer. And so it's with time, by trying to structure everything and being on time all the time, and producing on time. But then time gets devoid of meaning, and the products get devoid of their original quality.
Yeah.
And then they are it's just stuff. It's just meaningless things. So
yeah. There's a sense in which if I look at, I mean, a lot of I think I sent you the chapter that I wrote, and a lot of it is about this. But I think one of the, oops, you still there?
I just lost you for a few seconds.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Sweet. I think where I think there's an opening, if you will, right, is precisely in that there's suffering, right? That all this is going on, and that there's suffering, right? The fact that there's suffering, I think, discloses something that isn't a technological disclosure. I think it discloses one place Gestalt can't reach or hasn't totally reached. And it's that like human beings, we are primordial care. And so if we show up in a world and it doesn't have meaning, it's devastating, right? And that's painful, right? That meaninglessness is almost intolerable, and that we suffer is itself meaningful. So there's a disclosure in that. And I would say that, for like, just on a personal level, I think circling is actually a response to nihilism, in a way that, like, looking at it in retrospect now and looking at what's been responding to. And I think it's precisely, well, I tell you what, I just don't think we have any idea, like, the impact of what it means that we've, like, basically made almost all synchronistic communication optional, right? Like, that basically it used to be, not even that long ago, if you needed to talk to somebody, like if you needed to exchange information, you had at least use the phone. I think with all this iteration of social media and the internet and how fast that's happened, on a little bit more of an ontic level, like speaking more ontically, if we say that we become who we are in and through relationship, right? Which is, I think, obviously true, right? Like, it's like, as Tillich would say, it's like the human being is the tension between um, the mystery of participation and of individuation, right? And that in some sense, a relationship, right, is an enactment of that very tension, right? Like if there wasn't relationship, what would you participate in, right? So it's like on some level, that's how we become who we are. Well, what happens where all of a sudden life existence doesn't demand much of that from you, right? It's the kind of, I think it's the same. I draw the analogy between, I think, with the Industrial Revolution, mechanician basically made functioning, like removed movement from functioning. We didn't have to move anymore. And then all of a sudden, there's this new understanding or concern called physical fitness, which transformed our relationship to our bodies. And then there's gyms and all this kind of stuff, right? I think something's going on a interpersonal level in terms of relationship, that we've taken, like we can connect and exchange information without having to relate. Uncollapsing those two, I think it has catastrophic impacts. And I think circling, right? I think people's drawn to circling is in some way similar to the draw, like is similar to the same sensibility of like why people go to gyms. Because before there was just enough, there was so much, just your day-to-day existence in order to function, you had to talk to people, right? And now most of that's optional. That's never happened before. And
I agree.
Yeah. So I think it's like, so for me, there's something about, there may be an opportunity with that, right? If we have to start doing it on purpose, what does that mean, right? We start to have relationships like kind of on purpose, right? There's something strange about it. but like, maybe if we did it on purpose, it can disclose something that's actually, could be something quite extraordinary. I think there's hints of that in circling. I think dialogos is really about that, right? These kind of conversations, there's a huge hunger for these conversations, and no wonder, right? No wonder, because they're amazing. Like, we've gone to some spaces and the understandings that I'm sure I'll be thinking about for like, probably.
It's kind of like when I read like just the Kyoto school philosophy or the ancient school in Athens, or what Heidegger built in Freiburg, there's so many like people who were hungering to learn thinking, and they were all pilgrimaging to Freiburg. So I didn't know this, but in Japan they had this kind of like they really called it pilgrimage to Freiburg. So Freiburg Mode. So it's usually when you go to a shrine on New Year or so, and they call this with Freiburg. So and what I mean, when we look at these conversations online that have emerged now, and they have become stronger now in the coronavirus, because we're all locked up quite for months. There's this, what you said, this hunger, and there's this kind of like this kind of religious instinct to participate, relate, bind yourself to something higher.
Yeah.
And to share this with other people, who feel the same, who feel in the same way. And then you have these strange ways of coming together just because these networks just evolve in a very strange way.
Yeah, totally.
But just what we can build around it can be so powerful when you I mean, just the school of Athens and then the Kyoto school, or what all the scholars that were in the Heideggerian tradition, for example.
Yeah.
And just when you read some of these dialogues, they're so beautiful.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I feel like in some sense, I feel like I'm constituted, like I'm constituted by these conversations, like throughout my life. Like I've had mentors like that have just taken me under their wing, and like I've been really fortunate in a lot of respects. And so and then doing circling for, which is all about this. I feel I just have so much. It's like the discourse, right? Being with, right? Meitzen, right? It is the way the logos weaves the intelligibility of the world, right? Is in discourse. Like how else would it do it? And it can do it inauthentically, deeply, but it can also do it authentically, right? And I think that's the conversation that I'm most interested in.
That's why we have dialogue.
Yeah.
And again, the word for logos in Japanese is koto. And kotoba is language. So there's a similarity there. And I mean, for Heidegger as well, language was really that thing that that was, we could talk. We are the humans that have language. We are the animals that have language.
Yeah.
And through that we can have a relationship with being. We have what did he say? The fullness of world, so to say. We have world access through language.
Yeah.
And to me, it's also, you evoked few months ago when you talked with you talked about the fire. You're sitting around the fire.
Oh yeah, the logo. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I loved it. I loved this image so much because it's not just it reminded me of the Geviert, the fourfold of Heidegger.
Yeah.
Because it's like the trees, they take up the sunlight from the heavens, and they grow out of the earth.
Yeah.
And then you talk in earnesty, and then you're sensing something divine, the divine logos, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then the mortals and the divine are also coming together. Yeah. And that's this exemplification of the fourfold. What you can always see is like what's surrounding you, this darkness. I mean, you're this little light, right? Okay, so you're sitting somewhere on a I don't know, like a prairie or so. And you're this little light, and all around you is this darkness. Mm-hmm. And that's what I feel is this kind of like, but you have if you have an entrusting relationship to this darkness, as all that surrounds you,
trusting relationship,
this emptiness, then and it's this background, and you're the little light that's foregrounded. I mean, that's what the universe is. It's this dark, whatever.
Yeah.
And we are this little light that is lighting on this black horizon,
right?
That we don't understand, and still we should trust it.
Right. Still we should, yes, absolutely. I'm going to be, there's some way that trust in this conversation, I really appreciate this. Like the trust in this conversation hit me in a way, in a new way. I'm looking forward to, how that works itself out. I can tell it's like, you know, I don't know if you experience this, but like, you know, being in a conversation, just something kind of strikes, and then it just, you're out walking around and you're not even conscious that you're like thinking about it. And then all of a sudden you realize, oh, I'll be thinking about trust now all week, probably in between things. So I look forward to, I'll keep you.
But you can, when you have your conversation about emptiness, you can notice the trust between you, and not just between the people you're talking with, but also like the whole surrounding.
Yeah.
And also trust in the divine logos, so to say.
Right.
And how this brings forth new insights and awe and wonder and the good, so to say.
Yeah.
And how people and how people shine forth in a new way.
Yeah.
And how you get closer to this aletheia, so to say.
Oh,
And
yeah.
trust is I think trust is what drives this in a way.
Yeah. It's definitely what gives access to your heart, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's interesting. I have to bring this to a completion here pretty soon, but I noticed I've always been dissatisfied when somebody says, well, I just don't trust you, right? Or I'm in a conversation with somebody and they talked about like, you know, I don't trust this person, or I don't trust that, right? And there's something about, you're right, there is something about when someone withdraws their trust from something, there is this kind of blank, because it's almost like almost nothing else could happen anymore, right? And I think I was working with some clients or something like that, and they said something about, well, I just don't trust them, and I was like, well, actually, let's just say that you can't. Let's just pretend that you can't not trust somebody, right? Let's just say that like what if we say this is like, so what are you trusting in relationship with them, right? And it took something like, oh yeah, so it's like I trust my judgment that they're not gonna I trust that you're gonna hurt me. I trust an assessment of some kind that I have, right? And it's really interesting that this sense in which when you talk about not trusting someone, I've noticed this in relationships, like, oh, the buck just stops, nothing's possible, right? However, I'm always in a trusting relationship with something when I'm in a relationship with somebody else. And it may just not be that I trust you, right? Or maybe I more trust my assessment that you're gonna betray me or whatever it is. But there is a no, like, and I noticed in those conversations that something would break open, right, for that person. Like it just didn't, it stopped being just a blank impossibility, and something became possible with this sense of like that you can't not trust, right? You invest your trust into things. You can't like not trust. You just you're trusting something, right? And I think I think what I'm getting in this conversation is actually, I think what I'm getting is an experience that I've been having, and I've never quite thought about it in terms of, or seen quite that it really is about investing trust in something very, very deep, like the world, right? with a certain proactive unconditionality, right? Yeah. Really good to getting to know you. Thank you for this.
Thank you as well. It was a very, very good conversation, I think.
Absolutely. Really like I appreciate your actually, I really like that. I like the sense in like when you go and and then you lean forward, you're grappling with stuff. That it animates something that I'm sure I'm gonna continually, hopefully, understand more about you. But there's an earnestness and a sense of humor. I sense an unbelievable, unrelenting hunger for all this that we've been talking about.
Thank you.
Those are my projections.
The humor comes from the Austrian, like like usually the Germans are, they are the
yes.
kind of like the stiff people. They like order, but the Austrians are more like it's the relaxed. There's a flow to everything. There's music, Yeah,
great. All right, so let's do this again.
Great.
All right, my friend.
Goodbye. Bye.